Camera speeds.
Sound speed.
Scene 1 Delta, take 1.
Wait to settle, and action.
In this section, we're going to talk more about proof of work and other consensus mechanisms. So we're actually going to get into the alternative to proof of work. So Bitcoin, the other large blockchains like Ethereum, they use the proof of work mechanism in order to achieve consensus. But even back in 2012, there were alternatives that were launched, and specifically proof of stake. Proof of stake is the big alternative to proof of work. Many early blockchains use them, including Peercoin, NXT, and currently a lot of the more modern blockchains are now implementing those too, with EOS uses a variant called distributed proof of stake, Tezos uses another variant called liquid proof of stake. But the way all of those mechanisms or the proof of stake works in general is that your ability to create new blocks on the network is related to the amount of tokens or coins that you have on the network. So it's your stake in the system that gives you the ability to forge what's called forge new blocks. So in the early versions, it was actually, you still needed to do a bit of hashing, so you still need to run through that cryptographic hash function. However, the target number that you needed to get below was you had a higher target if you owned more coins. So for every participant on the network, if you had, say, 1 million coins, your target would be pretty high, so it would be very easy for you to forge a new block. And vice versa, if you only had like 1 coin, your target would be very low, so it would be almost impossible for you to create a new block. And that's the big alternative to proof of work. It actually uses a far less electricity and special processors and special chips. So in the Bitcoin network and in Ethereum, generally they use either what's called ASICs or they use graphic chips. They'll use a lot of GUIs. So not graphical processing, GPUs rather. So those are really important in proof of work blockchains. And proof of stake, it uses this alternative model. And also, when you get into private blockchains, it becomes a lot easier to come up with a different consensus model, that there are other alternatives to these two systems. We've been talking a lot about consensus, and consensus, as we've spoken about, is really just with regard to the history of the blockchain. So everyone needs to have the same history, and we all need to converge on a single state. So that's consensus on the history. However, there is an alternative consensus that is also going on, and that is we need consensus on the rules of the network. That is, with the protocol itself. What do we consider to be a valid block? What do we consider a valid transaction? You know, what kind of hash function do we use? What does the target need to be? All those rules are in the program that everyone is running. And obviously, those two consensuses are related, that you need to have consensus on the rules in order to have consensus on the history, right? We can't create any consistent history if everyone is not following the same rules, and vice versa. We can't really even apply the rules correctly unless we already have some pre-agreed upon history. So these two ideas are tightly intertwined. However, the earlier blockchains like Bitcoin and Ethereum don't really have a good mechanism to ensure that everyone is running the same rules, which in other words means everyone needs to run the same version of the software. So you may run into a situation where part of the network or part of the participants want to upgrade the software, and then some other faction does not want to upgrade. And that indeed did happen both in Bitcoin, that there's now Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. It happened in Ethereum, that now there are two versions, Ethereum and Ethereum Classic. And in both of these instances, it was because there was some change that was rolled out where not everybody was on board with that change. In the case of Bitcoin, it was because there was a proposal to increase the block size. That is, how many transactions can be in a single block. So a lot of participants in the network wanted to increase that from 1 megabyte to 8 megabytes. A lot of the other participants wanted to still stick to the same 1 megabyte limit, so the 8 megabyte version became Bitcoin Cash. In Ethereum, there was also a large hack that stole about $60 million worth of Ether. In order to fix this issue, or there was an opportunity to rather undo or roll back that transaction, the Ethereum Foundation released an update that undoes it. However, there was about 10% of the Ethereum community that did not want to implement such a change. So since they did not upgrade, their version of the blockchain became known as Ethereum Classic, and the general Ethereum that everyone is, that most of the network is on, is the one that did implement this change to roll back that transaction with the stolen funds. There is also a third element of consensus that's going on, that's in play here, especially with public blockchains, and that is the idea that in public blockchains there are these tokens or these coins that have value, or that people perceive as having value. And so obviously in the case of Bitcoin, there's Bitcoin on the Bitcoin network, there's Ether on the Ethereum network, and these tokens are used to incentivize all the participants to maintain this history and implement the protocol and follow all the same rules. So it's the tokens that is the incentive mechanism. So that also is prompting. You can actually go back to the.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just take that.
Yeah, see that again? Okay.
When we go back to, there is a third.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
There is also a third element of consensus that's going on in a blockchain network, especially with public blockchains that have also digital currency that is running on the platform. So we have Bitcoin, in the case of Bitcoin, on the Bitcoin platform, there's Ether on the Ethereum network, and those tokens are used to incentivize all the participants to maintain the history and keep track of all the transactions and implement all the rules of the protocol. So that token is really instrumental in ensuring that we do have consensus on history and on the protocol. But of course, that requires or implies that everyone in the network feels that these tokens have value. So there's this kind of implicit agreement or this implicit understanding or feeling that these tokens are valuable. So with the combination of all these three elements, a blockchain is able to maintain this accurate history of everything that's been going on. Of course, that's only in public blockchains. On private blockchains, you generally would not have any token of value, so there are other structures that sort of take the place of having coins of value in order to ensure that everyone is maintaining the history accurately, and that's something that we'll see talked about in future lessons. But for now, understand that number one, there are different kinds of consensus mechanisms, such as besides for proof of work, so known as proof of stake, and there are some others out there too. And also with consensus, it's more than just an issue of or a challenge of having everyone run the same history, but also we need everyone on board with some other ideas about conforming to some rules and some tokens.
Cutting.